Welcome to the online course Essentials of Youth Policy, organised by the partnership between the European Commission and the Council of Europe in the field of youth.
I'm very excited to be here today with all of you, and thank you to the learners, to the participants for your time, and to our colleague Irina Lonean for being with us today. I guess that the issue and topic of monitoring and evaluation is part of more or less everybody's life, regardless of the way and the scope in which you are operating. So the idea of this webinar is really to provide information and knowledge, know-how in a way to help you also transfer the knowledge and information in other areas of your work and life. Let me remind you that the sixth module is already open of our MOOC, which deals with the future of youth policy in Europe. But this webinar, as Laimonas mentioned, is part of the fifth module. Still, I think that planning the future and thinking about the future is really better if it's based on evidence, right, and knowledge. So I'm really happy, as I said, to be here today and to help you all learning from this experience. I'm going to give floor now to our colleague Irina to start with the presentation, and later on we are going to have, let's say, about 30 minutes for the discussion. As Laimonas already mentioned, feel free to post your questions on Q&A window, and you can also post your comments in the chat window. Enjoy the learning.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for having me for this webinar. I'm really glad to be able to share some of the things that I think are important about monitoring and evaluation of youth policies in particular. I will say a couple of words about me. I'm a political science bachelor, and I started working in youth projects and programs since I was a student. And then when I finished college, I started also working in consultancy, doing program and policy evaluations for different kinds of policies and programs. And for some years now, I'm putting together the two expertise that I developed in youth programs and projects and policies, and in monitoring and evaluation, in order to do monitoring and evaluation of youth policies and programs. And I think this is very important because I'm finding out with surprise every time that people think that monitoring and evaluation are really tough subjects. And I don't think they are really so tough, but we need to learn how you very well said, how to transfer our knowledge from different things that we do every day in order to learn from our experience. Because what it's monitoring and evaluation at the bottom of all definitions, it's an organized way of learning from experience of what we are doing in order to inform and do better in the future. That's why monitoring and evaluation are not a control way to do things or a control of what we are doing, but a very constructive approach to doing things further, even better, learning what we are doing best in order to continue, and learning what we are not doing so well in order to correct it. What is very, very important in monitoring and evaluation, it's in the first place to understand the theory of change of everything that we are evaluating. As far as I know, the MOOC includes some elements about planning the youth policy, and probably most of you already got through the whole learning process of how a policy is planned. and also how knowledge and research is important for the youth policies. Putting together the two things, what it's a very important notion for monitoring and evaluation, it's to understand a policy, and this is also applicable to programs and projects, to understand this as a theory of change. What we are doing, our input and activities are generating a change, that it's first of all an output, a very direct result and effect of what we are doing, that it's adding on an outcome, that it's generating a change at a very specific level, and then impact that is generating a change generally in the life of the young people. And having this in mind, we can go through and see what we can monitor and what we can evaluate in a youth policy. There is important, and generally every kind of lecture or learning material on monitoring and evaluation will give you a definition of monitoring, a definition of evaluation, and the differences and similarities between the two of them, because it's important to understand that we need the two of them to learn from our experience in the youth policies. Monitoring is therefore something that we do generally constantly in order to track our progress against what we already planned, and in order to inform evaluation at certain times during the implementation of a youth policy. And this is also valuable for other kind of policies, or for programs, or for youth projects. Anything that it's something that we plan, we put inputs and activities in, and we expect for an outcome and output, then we will need to track our progress in order to inform our learning at the end of the way. What is important is to do monitoring regular in order to see if the assumptions and risks that we had in mind at the beginning, even if we had it in mind or we explicitly put it on the whole programming and planning, are still valid, if risks have materialized, and if we need to do something very fast to correct it. Evaluation, on the other hand, so different from monitoring, it's made at specific moments in time, and it's an assessment. It's based on values and tries to see not only what we expected, what we did against what we expected, but what we did and we effectively changed in young people's life or youth workers' life, and so on. The purpose of the monitoring is generally to improve efficiency of the policy that we are monitoring. The purpose of evaluation is to improve efficiency and effectiveness and the impact of the policy we're evaluating if the policy has not ended its implementation, or of future policies as well. And generally, evaluation, it's done based on 5 main criterias. The criterias are relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, sustainability, and impact. And from my experience, people don't really have much problems in understanding exactly what each criteria it's related to, so it's not so tough as you would expect from the beginning. Relevance is generally related to how the policy responds to the needs of the young people, if we are speaking about a youth policy, and also how the policy is designed in order to be coherent with other policies targeting young people and within itself, so not having measures and actions that will determine different and contradicting outcomes. It's still a thing related to the relevance of the youth policy. The effectiveness refers at the outcomes and outputs and outcomes of the policy, and generally looks at how the performance of the policy against the goals established at the beginning. The efficiency refers at how we use resources, not only financial resources, but also human resources or time resources that are very important, and also information resources. If we have research on the youth and previous evaluations, for example, and we use them, this is an efficient way of using the knowledge research. Sustainability refers to how durable, how sustainable is the policy, and how sustainable are the results. Because generally, when we speak about sustainability of a youth policy, we think at two different things. First, if the activities that we put in place with the policy can be sustained. So if the youth policy means we organize youth centers in rural areas, for example, the sustainability of the policy will tell us if the youth centers are themselves sustainable for a longer time than the one that it's the main focus of the policy. The sustainability of results will look at the impact of the policy, and then to see if the changes made in the life of young people participating in the youth centers are sustainable. So it's very much related to the quality of the services or the work or the activities that we did during the implementation. And the impact, it's probably the most important. If it's not sustainable, it counts, but not so much. It's important to have sustainable impact, and it refers to the change that the policy is doing or it's making. And it refers to the change that the policy is making, first of all, in the life of young people, because we are speaking about the youth policy, but also the youth policy will generate some changes in the life and work of youth workers, in the life and work of professionals working with young people. And sometimes, and we hope in the case of many youth policies, they will generate an impact and change at the level of how policies in the future are made, or how the administration or the organizations are working with young people. And generally, impact needs to be evaluated and assessed at all these levels. So the young people, professionals working with young people, and the institutions. There are many kinds of evaluations. I will try to make it as simple as possible, because although there are many words and some of them may be new, there is not so difficult to explain the evaluation. And I will start with something that is in the middle of this slide related to who is doing the evaluation. Generally, the youth policy, it's, as you already know, an intervention that it's designed and driven by a public institution. So the first question is, who is doing the evaluation? The institution that it's also doing the policy, the design, and maybe the implementation of the policy, or somebody else. And there is not a recipe, and there is not something that it's correct and something that it's incorrect. You can have internal evaluation that it's carried out by the institution in charge with the policy, and external evaluation that can be external in the institution, so the same institution or another public institution, but not exactly the department that it's in charge with the policy, the youth policy that you are evaluating. but you also can have independent evaluation. Generally, the recommendation of international organizations, including international organizations as the European Union and the Council of Europe, but also international organizations of professionals in monitoring and evaluation, will recommend independent evaluation, or at least external evaluation, because they will ensure the degree of objectivity in assessing the policy that you will need. But otherwise, if you are working in a small municipality, for example, and you still have some programs for young people and you want to evaluate them, it's not something that you cannot do because you don't have the resources to externalize or to employ an independent evaluator. If you pay attention to the general principles of autonomy of the evaluator and objectivity in assessing, then there is no problem that the evaluation is made internally by the same institution or body that it's in charge with the youth policy. There are two other type of criteria that are important in understanding evaluation. There is the perspective of putting evaluation in typologies based on timing and purpose. So we generally speak of 3 moments of time when we do evaluation with 3 different purposes. We will have ex-ante evaluation that is done before policy formulation or before policy planning. That it's generally what it's called a prospective evaluation. We don't know exactly what are the results of the policy we evaluate. We just try to anticipate them. If there are
Irina,
any questions.
May I just shortly intervene? Sorry. There is one question coming from one of the participants, namely Agata, for whom, as we learned, this webinar is really timely, but not only for her. There are other processes ongoing, which I'm going to mention later on. But the question is basically the comment. Could you please give us some examples? Because most of the people are less familiar with the concepts and terms, so it could be in a way difficult to follow. I totally agree with the fact that monitoring and evaluation shouldn't be that scary, but of course we should acknowledge that some concepts are really highly technical. So could you please support it with a few examples? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So ex-ante evaluation or the prospective evaluation, it's the evaluation that it's done before planning a policy based on the need analysis that we already done. In most of the European countries, or in theoretically all of the European countries, that made better or less well, there are laws providing the need to have ex-ante evaluations or prospective evaluation of the policies or legal norms, including laws that are adopted. So, for example, if we want to adopt a law on the field of youth centers, that will tell anybody that will put up and carry out activities of youth centers what they should do by the law, what it's mandatory to do at minimum, then in order to understand what we can plan, we will have, as you already know, a need assessment at the beginning, seeing what the young people will need from a youth center. But we will also need to have an evaluation that will tell us if any organization or institution that can form and put give to the young people the services of youth center have the capacity to do it. And this evaluation or assessment of the capacity, it's part of the ex-ante evaluation that will tell us how the policy can be formulated. If we can say that all youth centers need to provide at least, I don't know, 40 hours a week of services to young people, we need to be sure that in all municipalities, we need to be sure that we have organizations in the municipalities that can provide this kind of services. And this will be provided by an ex-ante evaluation that will look at the capacity, existing capacity already, that will look at other laws, for example, to see if there is a contradiction between what we want to do and what is already provided by other laws, and so on. The other kind of evaluation that it's also related to purpose and time. It's the interim evaluation or the formative evaluation that it's done during the implementation of some programs or policies. So we plan our policy on doing or building and running youth centers in all municipalities, for example, and then we start implementing the policy. And at a moment in time, after a few years, we need to know how, not only how many youth centers are up running, that it's something that we monitor and it's pretty easy, but how the youth centers that are already established are working, if they have any problems in doing their jobs, if they have more capacity or more resources that we anticipated and they can do more than we planned, and so on. And this is something that we do in an interim evaluation. We look how much they did from what we planned, why they didn't achieve everything, or where they are exceeding expectation and can be, they can provide good practices, and so on. And we try to see this during the implementation of the policy in order to be able to adjust the policy if we need it. If we will find out during the evaluation that we were too optimistic about the capacity, and actually we don't have youth centers in all the municipalities. We have youth centers in half of the municipalities in the territory that we targeted, and the one that are running already have some problems in finding youth workers to be employed, then we will need to adjust our policy and at least to add some capacity building support for the organizations that can form and build youth centers. So this is how a formative interim evaluation will look like. And finally, theoretically, after project or policy and or program implementation, we'll have something that is called ex post evaluation or summative evaluation that will look at the whole process and tell us where we did really well and we need to continue, and we can promote good practices to other countries or other regions, and where we didn't did so well. So we need to learn how to correct this in the future if we want to do something similar, or we need to add something to the next policy in order to achieve what we expected at the beginning. So probably we will have youth centers in some municipalities working very well and they can share their experience. And we will have some municipalities where we cannot implement the policy, and we will, the evaluation, the summative evaluation will tell us why, what are the bottlenecks, let's say, and how this can be solved based on the experience of many on quantitative data, how this can be solved in order to achieve at the end the result. So with another policy, but with the same goal. I hope this was generally clear. Another thing that it's really tricky, and this is, sorry for being technical here, this is probably the last thing that is extremely technical in the presentation. It's the impact evaluation of youth policy. Impact evaluation is generally part of the interim or the summative, the ex post evaluation, the evaluation that is done at the end of the implementation of the youth policy. And impact evaluation will look, as I said, at the results and the change that the policy is doing in the life of young people, but also in the life of professionals working with young people, at community level and at the level of organizations working with young people, being non-governmental organization or the public organizations. And the theory, let's say, or the practice of monitoring and evaluation tell us that there are two different ways of organizing impact evaluation. One is theory-based evaluation, and here I will go back to probably the first thing that I said, that it's very important to have a theory of change of our project or program or policy, because theory evaluation, it's a way, a very organized way, but not complicated, and I will tell you in a moment why it's not so complicated, of seeing if the theory of change that we established at the beginning of the planning of a policy. So we said the policy of establishing youth centers in all the municipalities will provide young people with specific services for young people, and for this will encourage participation of young people. And theory-based evaluation will just test if this theory it's working as it was planned, if the relationship, the logical relationship between inputs, activities, outcomes, and the impact are really happening as it was planned. The counterfactual evaluation, it's another story, a bit more complicated, not so complicated for the one of us, of you that have studied social science, because it's the way in which the experimental design of a research, that it's based on having an intervention group, the people that benefit from the policy, and the control group, people, generally young people, that didn't benefit from the policy, can be compared. So based on different sociological methods and techniques, what it's done in the counterfactual evaluation, it's to compare the benefits of the policy to the target group, to what's happening to a similar group of people that were not the target group of the policy. That's why counterfactual, it's just asking what is happening to the people that are similar to the one that benefited, but didn't benefit from the youth policy. And it's generally based on statistics and quantitative sociological methods. But at the end, it's not so complicated as it sounds at the beginning. It's a comparison between the impact of the policy at the level of the target group and the impact of the policy at the level of people that didn't benefit. So we have youth centers in some municipalities. We don't have youth centers in other municipalities. We can compare the level of participation of young people where youth centers exist to the level of participation of young people where youth centers don't exist. and see if the policy of promoting youth centers is actually generating a boost of participation where youth centers are present. And I think these examples can make the theory of the counterfactual evaluation more clear. Monitoring and evaluation are important.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
Sorry for interrupting. Thank you very much. I mean, I guess this really helps us clarify. Could you please just get back to the concept of theory of change?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's not really, you know, the common, but it's really kind of useful to understand the whole point and the story. Thank you.
The theory of change, it's the theory we create when we plan a youth policy. It's related, it's applicable to any kind of policy, any kind of program or project as well. So even without saying or call it like this, anybody that is planning an activity, it's generating a theory of change. I put something in, that's the input, I do some activities, and I will have some results at the end. The relation between what we are putting in, the input and the activities, and the result and the impact at the end, it's called theory of change in evaluation and monitoring. That's why it has this name, because afterwards the evaluation is just testing if the theory is true. So to continue the example, I can give you many examples of the theory of changes, but to continue this example of the same policy on establishing youth centers in municipalities on a territory, the theory of change will say that what we need to do is to build or establish youth centers. That's an input. The activities are services to young people that are happening in the youth centers. If we provide all of this, then we will have young people benefiting from all these services. And at the end, as a result and the impact of the services, young people would participate more to the life of their community. This is, in a very, very simple way, how the theory of change will look like for the policy that I described as an example to explain the different kinds of evaluation. What is doing the summative or ex post evaluation at the end, it's to test if I was right at the first place, saying that if we have youth centers and services provided to young people in the youth centers, then young people benefiting from the services will participate more to the life of the community. And we will use generally sociological methods in order to test if this is right. So to test if the theory at the beginning was correct, and it can be proved by the experience and the facts. Monitoring and evaluation of youth policy, it's monitoring and evaluation of policies in general, it's important. As I said at the beginning, it's important to learn from the experience. Policy monitoring and evaluation of youth policies, it's sometimes even more important, because youth policies are not very lucky in being the most important when we talk about public policies in general. And monitoring and evaluation, it's really helping, and evaluation mainly, it's really helpful in proving the benefits and the results and the impact in the life of young people, and then at the community level in general of youth policies, in order to make it more important among different kinds of policies. The other thing that is important is that monitoring and evaluation, it's another part of the policy cycle of each policy that give possibility of beneficiaries of a policy to participate. And participation to the policy that are targeting them, it's extremely important for young people. It's more important, it's very important for all citizens. It's more important for young people probably than for anybody else, because it's also integrating the level of learning in it. So we don't only participate in order to have our voice heard, we also participate in order to learn how to participate in the future as young people. And this is important because it's important to participate not only when saying what we need, it's important to participate also in saying if what we are getting, it's what we need. And this is participating to evaluation. So that's why it's the learning citizenship of the learning of the role of citizenship that is important. It's also important for young people because they are learning how to get or to hold institutions that are responsible for them accountable. And this is something that is extremely important in building the citizenship. It also gives youth policy high relevance, as I said, because it will tell the institution that initiated the policy not only if it was relevant for the young people and the needs at the beginning, but also if it continued to be relevant over the time. What is also very important for anybody doing evaluation, it's indicators. As I remember, part of the planning of a youth policy in the MOOC was related to how to establish indicators. So I will not go very much into details here, but it's very important to evaluation generally, it's made against the indicators that we already established. So we measure something that we planned to do at the beginning, and that's why we will have in our theory of change indicators established for each step of the theory of change. The input, the output, and the outcome of a policy. So what we are putting in, like the youth centers, what we are getting out, like how many young people are benefiting from services of youth center, and the outcome on participation of young people will have specific indicators to measure what is happening. As I said, how many youth centers, how many young people are participating or are benefiting, and how many young people are participating. I will not go into the details of this slide, but the example of the youth center or the policy establishing youth centers is just an example. As you can see, the indicators of the youth policy are all the time related to the objectives of the youth policy. So that was just an example. You can have indicators related to employment and unemployment, youth inclusion and exclusion, training, participating in school, and access to information, and so on, health, mobility, volunteering, and so on. And I told you before, the evaluation methods are not something new to the word, and they are not specific to evaluation. Most of the evaluation methods are methods used in sociological research. Some of them are used in economical research, but socioeconomic field and methods available there are used in monitoring and evaluation mainly. And also evaluation can bring new methods to the world of sociological methods, like the Delphi survey, that have been used before being a sociological instrument, have been used in order to evaluate policies and so on. There are a large, very large number of stakeholders that are interested and need to be involved in evaluation, including state institutions, international organizations like the Council of Europe and the European Commission that are part of the Youth Partnership, but also the communities, the local authorities, and mostly the young people that need to be involved in evaluation, and I already stressed this in the presentation. What I would like to add is that at this moment I am part of a project that is ongoing at the level of the Youth Partnership between the European Commission and the Council of Europe, related to a survey or a research or an evaluation, if you want, of how youth policy evaluation is done in Europe in general, so all the countries that are part of the Council of Europe. We did a survey among the countries. We also established some best practices or case studies that can be shared between the countries to see how the practice of evaluation can be used further in youth policies. Sadly, evaluation of youth policies is not a general practice in Europe, but what is good is that we have some practices that we can share. And the other thing that is important, because I spoke very much about evaluation in general, is that it's extremely, extremely important to use the results of the evaluation. So if we do evaluation in a formative way to form or reform the youth policies, or if we do a summative evaluation to find out about the impact of the youth policy, it's the most important thing after doing the evaluation is to use it, to use the results in the way of making the policy better, or to promote the results of the policy in making, to make youth policy more important at the national level, and so on. And this is still a challenge that it's faced by many countries. And this is something that we would like to inform through our review, how youth policy evaluations can be used afterward. Other challenges are related to institutional cooperation or using statistical data made or collected by other institutions. And this kind of webinars are probably needed in order to inform all the stakeholders that are in charge to do evaluations about how they can do and what are the resources that they can access, because there are a lot of things about evaluation, probably not specifically about youth policy evaluation, that are available for learning and needs to be more promoted at the level of responsible authorities in the field of youth policies. What about practices? We have some examples, but these are not the only ones. What is actually evaluated in Europe, it's either the youth strategies or some youth programs that it's not so well spread. EU policies targeting young people, like the Youth Guarantee, for example, or policies related to employment of young people, where the EU was a very important actor in promoting them, are generally evaluated because this is part of how policies related or promoted by the EU, the European Commission, are done. And the European Commission, it's also asking about or for these evaluations. So evaluation of EU policies or EU funded programs, implemented policies targeting young people, it's probably the most well spread type of evaluation did in Europe. It's important, and there are some good practices in involving youth researchers in doing youth policy evaluations. And we also have some very interesting examples, like the French one that is doing policy experimentation, that are projects implementing a small policy at a very local level, and then evaluating it to see if the policy can be scaled up at the level of a country, or it needs adjustments in order to be an impactful policy. Many times good practices are available, and international organizations are key in promoting these good practices. So in promoting learning from each other in different countries. And these are, the youth partnership is very active at this level. Separately, the European Commission and the EU and the Council of Europe are also promoting these things, but also UN agencies like UNDP or UNICEF are also promoting youth policy evaluations in many countries, including countries in Europe. And the other conclusion that I would like to stress now is that it's extremely important, as I probably already said, to do impact evaluation of youth policy in order to promote the youth policy as something that it's really important for young people's life at the level of decision makers in a government or in a regional government or local government. So to make youth policies more important for decision makers in general, we need to prove their impact, and evaluation is a tool to prove their impact. Thank you. That is my presentation. Sorry for taking so long. It was a bit longer than expected. I will be happy to answer your question.
Thank you very much, Irina. It was really informative. And I guess there are many, many questions to be, clarified and raised. Some of them are already uploaded in Q&A window. Dear learners, dear participants, please feel free to upload more questions in the same window. Until then, I'm gonna post, I'm gonna ask, let's say I'm gonna advocate for Agata. We asked if Agata wants to join us live, but okay, maybe some other time. Anyway, I guess many participants have more or less similar, struggle and ideas around. The question is around whether evaluation needs to be only about numbers, or how to make a progress in the evaluation process. Sorry, I guess it's around how can we add a bit of qualitative, information around numbers. We are quite aware of the fact that politicians and policymakers are in favor of numbers, but we learn the best from the rest of the material. What is your experience?
Well, I personally, I'm working with qualitative methods. So I'm not a statistician. I'm struggling sometimes understanding and applying some quantitative methods. So I'm very much an advocate for the importance of qualitative information and the qualitative evaluation. It's important to have some numbers. It's extremely important to say how many people have been influenced by a policy. But this is not the end of the story. It's also important, and this is not in numbers, this is in qualitative information, how the change happened. So how many people have been motivated to participate and participated actually based on a youth policy. It's a quantitative data. What is the motivation drive? How they have been convinced, how they started going to the youth center, for example, because I will keep this this example to make it more coherent. How people decided to go to activities of a youth center and how then they have been convinced to participate further in their community. It's something that we will learn from qualitative evaluation. Or qualitative research. And this is done using pretty simple methods as interviews or focus groups or case studies and observation, where we talk with people, but we also observe how they are interacting and how they are behaving in some situations. And what we are generally doing in evaluation is trying to have numbers in order to have a measure of the impact or effectiveness or the sustainability or the efficiency of a policy, and then having qualitative research in order to explain how this happened, how impact happened, how the efficiency is achieved, and so on. Because it's not only saying that building youth centers in each municipality, it's cheaper for the budget than having services provided in another way. It's something. How this is happening and why it's cheaper, it will be said by stories of people saying how they cooperate between institutions and so on. And this is based on qualitative evaluation. It's pretty difficult at the moment to convince decision makers of the impact of a policy without having any kind of quantitative data. I personally tried sometimes because I didn't have the time, the resources, or actually how to collect the quantitative data. And it's possible, but it's tougher and you need to collect more qualitative data. But on the other hand, just the quantitative data, it's saying something, but it's not saying the story of how the theory of change, I will go back to that, it's actually true. It will tell you if the theory of change is true, but why it is, it will not tell you the quantitative data, but the qualitative ones.
Yeah, okay. We have a few more questions. One of them is referring to development of effective policies in rural areas. And another is around the survey. I guess that the countries involved in the survey are already listed in the slides, right? Or maybe you can clarify.
I'm not in the slides. There are 32 countries around Europe. I need to go to look for.
Okay.
There are 32 from probably all the regions covered by the Council of Europe.
Oh, okay. Just to clarify, the survey has been already done, so the results will be published very soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Could you please reflect on these rural moments? Is there anything? Is there any way in which the knowledge could help us, in a way, boost activities in rural areas, in remote areas?
Rural areas, what the challenge with rural areas is that they are remote and hard to reach by policies, and they are remote and hard to reach by evaluators as well. But this doesn't mean that it's not possible to evaluate them. Yeah. And I think there are good practices of how to design and implement youth policies and programs or projects in rural areas that can be evaluated, and sometimes people implementing them have been evaluating them and published the results. So this is another way where evaluation is extremely helpful, will help somebody else trying to do, to reach similar results, to be informed about what was done, what worked, and what didn't work in previous examples. So there are some things done. I will need to look further, but I would be happy to provide some further information on that after trying to arrive to this information, because I don't have them in my mind, but there are experience of that.
Okay, thank you very much. The technical information, Laimonas, correct me if I'm wrong, but after 2 o'clock, which is 3 o'clock basically, which is in 1 minute, this webinar should be officially over, and we are going to say a big thank you to Irina and all of you participating. But after that, almost half an hour, we are going to be still open, for your questions. So feel free to ask. Also, the webinar will be uploaded. Laimonas, could you please follow up on?
Yes. So I just posted a link to the discussion forum where the webinar will be uploaded. Plus, it will be available on the Youth Partnership YouTube channel as well as on the Facebook page. So these are the spaces, and we're not gonna have a webinar open for half an hour, but like maybe 5 minutes for reviewing the chat, questions, and then we'll stop the webinar broadcast.
Okay. Let me just also say that the webinar is timely in terms of the ongoing processes which are taking place across Europe. Also referring to the revision of the EU Youth Dashboard of Indicators and the revision of Youth Developmental Index, for example. So there are many activities and many actions going on in terms of providing and updating the indicators that we are using to monitor and evaluate not only European policies, but also national ones. So let's hope that, this will help us to update our knowledge as well on many levels. Thank you very much, Irina, once again.
Thank you
for your valuable input, and thank you to the learners and to all of participants for your time and for being with us. Keep contributing and learning from the MOOC, and thanks a lot once again.
Thank you.
Hope this video contributed to your learning about youth policy.